What is up, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome back to FudgeMuppet. This is the Elder Scrolls podcast. I'm Scott, here with Michael and Drew, as always, and today we are talking about the Lord of Revelry, the Daedric Prince of Lust, Perversity, and Unnatural Sexual Relations. We are talking about Sanguine. So which one of you guys would like to start us off with this fellow?
Daedrologist Drew.
I'll give some expert insight. He's basically the guy who says, I'll be the designated driver, but then just ensures that everyone is as irresponsible as possible, gets as messed up as possible, and probably will end up spending their lives partying until they die. He's that guy who kind of never grows out of it, you know. Everyone else gets their business suit on, and he's still like wondering if you're coming to the house party on the weekend. No, there's more to him than that, but you know, he's a little bit more sinister than he may seem, and he may intend to be because of these aspects.
Yeah, I think he's another one of those Daedric princes that really takes advantage of the nature of mortals. And by nature, he is very involved with mortals. Like, what would he be doing if not for mortals? You know, like, whose affairs would he be meddling in? I'm not sure. But he does tend to really promote people's vices and their darker nature, and he enjoys bringing the wild side out of people who may otherwise be meek. And I think he has different reputations in different places. Like, a lot of people have this idea that he is not a malicious type, but when you look at some aspects of him, like any Daedric prince, he is like you were saying, Drew. Sometimes he will have someone party eternally and trap them into, you know, some deal they didn't know they'd be a part of. Whereas other people have this view of like, well, he gives me what I want and I don't have to live a mundane existence and no harm ever came from it. Well, at least not that they know of.
I think too, it's kind of part that Bethesda's, well, in the two recent main Elder Scrolls entries, his quests have been rather like lighthearted and whimsical, like the whole basically hangover quest of Skyrim, and I'm going to go to a party and make everyone nude. Oh, how scandalous kind of thing. And it's very like light in tone, whereas a lot of the darker natures have been seen in ESO and then also just written into the lore. But obviously some of the darker natures that are implied can't be shown in a lot of these video games or talked about. They're pretty like, you know, so it just gets broadly called darker natures. But, you know, everything like hedonism, debauchery, wild orgies, everything like that. But you can imagine taken to the extreme. I mean, I don't know if you guys are familiar with Warhammer 40k, but there's the Slaanesh, the big god demon of pleasure and similar kind of things. You can imagine Slaanesh somewhat as like the actual extreme of what Sanguine is capable of. Like some of the really crazy sort of, you know, almost like mind-melting hedonism kind of things. And, you know, you can expand that to like all kinds of narcotics or whatever. Or
you can almost imagine as well that even though Sanguine seems like a pretty amicable fellow who everyone can get along with, the gods especially would probably be quite annoyed with him if you ask their opinions. Like, you don't really hear from the Aedra, but say you've got like Xenophar, who believes that you should work hard and you'll be rewarded for your hard work. You got, you know, say Mara, who's the, you know, agriculture is a big part of her sphere. And, you know, so like build a family, look after one another, work hard, you know, keep the land healthy, all of this stuff. And then you got Sanguine, who's like, don't bother, like, don't work, just get drunk.
He's the quick dopamine hit of the Elder Scrolls universe.
Exactly.
Something else.
And he doesn't understand moderation.
Well, something else that's quite interesting, if people wanted an insight into, for starters, we can start. This is part. He's often referred to as by the Khajiit as a blood god, and we'll get to that in a second. I'll read his description. But even the word sanguine is like a color of blood red, and even those like little like kind of symbolic kind of things. But I'll just read this from the Worldly Spirits. But it's like Sanguine, blood god of the second litter. Sanguine is not an evil spirit by nature, but Khajiit must know that all things within his sphere turn true cats from the path. These are the urges of blood and pleasure without purpose. To fall to Sanguine is not to give to the dark, but to give into the flesh. He tries to tempt Khajiit into making their flesh immortal, and this is a prison to all spirits of the Khajiit. Sanguine is therefore a spirit that will test you on the path and must be overcome. The secret to defeating him is to ignore him, and this we learned from Mephala, who said, "Lust for nothing but truth." But it's interesting here that it's a more overt this idea that he's associated with blood. And even if you look at the Varieties of Faith book about the Khajiit specifically, he's called the Blood Cat, god of death and secret murder. Sanguine's worship is hidden from the cat's eye for who can control the urges of blood. But it's kind of, I like it's almost like kind of maybe some primal nature sort of like, there's a lot of murder reference there and urges of the blood and like kind of like taking pleasure almost in killing, or like as you can imagine like the pleasure that a lion gets when they get their kill or something like that almost. Do you know what I mean? There's some interesting crossovers there, and
like a bit more animalistic going
Yeah.
off obviously what a Khajiit is.
Yeah.
And that's one thing about the Khajiit pantheon, is if you kind of imagine that it's essentially you follow a path to the heavens, to the sound behind the stars, and there's mention of giving into the dark. Like you've got Namira, who's the kind of malignant, insidious, turning you into a Dromaphra kind of goddess or deity. But then Sanguine, he's not nearly as kind of creepy as Namira, but giving into the flesh and straying from the path. It doesn't matter how you stray from the path. If you stray from the path, you've strayed from the path in the Khajiit pantheon. So even if it's not intentional or not terribly cruel, it's still extremely dangerous to the Khajiit. And you can probably see that if you go into a skooma den where you've got Khajiit who abuse this substance so hard that they, their lives are ruined, and really that's not too different to becoming a Dromaphra.
It is interesting to think about as well all of the people who may have gone on to do really, really positive things for the world, but because they strayed from the path and got distracted with these darker desires, those things therefore didn't happen. And so you can look at it more as a dark thing in terms of not fulfilling your potential for good in the world. And really, it's not just the Khajiit pantheon, but he pulls all mortals kind of from the path or from life. So
well, you almost wonder why he's not a corner or like a secret corner of the House of Troubles or something, because I mentioned that the Daedra wouldn't like him, but the good Daedra who encouraged the Dark Elves to follow the Psijic endeavor and seek enlightenment and whatnot, Sanguine goes completely against all of that as well. He'd just have them drinking Sajama all day.
Yeah.
So even the Daedra really probably wouldn't be too fond of him, most of them.
Yeah, I think in some ways as well, you could almost look at him as a reflection of the mortal. Like I'm not sure of any tales where he makes a mortal take part in something that they don't secretly crave or would want to do anyway. Like if you are a super boring kind of, individual and deep down, I'm saying deep, you actually don't have any dark desires, then I'm not sure how much influence or power he can really exert over you through temptation.
But there's that Daedra from ESO, the demi-prince called Fan Nui Hen, or however that's pronounced.
Yeah.
And there's a quote from her saying, "It is in Sanguine's nature to indulge the natures of others, particularly their darker desires. So to Sanguine, absolute control is anathema." So like the idea that Sanguine has no interest in forcing things upon mortals. It's much more satisfying to him to give them inspire them and give them what they want, to the point where they're their own ruin.
It's almost like he's not really aware of the outcomes too. It's very much like his entertainment. What's going to happen if I, encourage this behavior?
He's thinking about all the fun aspects, and then when somebody's overdoes it, then it's like, oh no, how did that go wrong?
And typically, like we sort of said, you'll often just find a lot of it is just like maybe it's having affairs and drinking and orgies and sort of relatively tame things in the grand scheme of things. But when you read some of the ESO like item descriptions, there's like certain worshippers, they may wear red lipstick to proclaim their dedicated commitment to passion, and breed goats with eldritch glowing eyes to partake in their Daedric rituals. And as a god of hedonism, if you want to kind of connect some dots, and they're kind of breeding goats for these Daedric rituals, whatever that may be, you may come to some interesting conclusions, but you can kind of see how dark and how like twisted it could potentially be. Like it's there for it. And I think I sort of imagine Sanguine is constantly excited by the what's next. What are these mortals going to do next to the mortals? Like he constantly encouraging you. He's like, yeah, do more. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with all of that. And I like your interpretation of those two elements you mentioned. the reality is a lot more boring when you look at the Elder Scrolls Online kind of lore of what it's for. The goat sacrifice, I think was, yeah, but
it's just a description for a pet.
No, there's a commemoration of something playing undead, like you know how dogs play dead.
Yeah.
Yeah, one instance of these spontaneous celebrations is the 400th anniversary of Sanguine's dog learning to play undead, and then I could have sworn the dog was involved, well, the goat was involved with that. If it's not, though, I know the lipstick for sure. The description for that says, show your passion to Sanguine, Debella, or some other god or something.
This is the other thing that's, like, lipstick inherent. It's not that, like, illicit or anything like that.
Yeah, of course.
It's just if you can sort of imagine it in the context of what they're doing. And
to add to what you were saying about kind of like seeing where mortals will take it, it's one of the unique things about Lorkhan's realm is that if when you think about lesser Daedra, you don't really think about them as having like much free will. They're kind of just at the whim and the beck and call of the Daedric princes that rule the realms they live in for the most part. You know, they can have their own personalities, but there's not much going on, whereas, you know, Lorkhan's designs kind of give these mortals free will, which is why Daedric princes love to meddle with them so much. And for Sanguine, free will, you know, as we've kind of mentioned, is really important. So seeing where they can take it with their creativity is much more exciting than, say, he just had a party with a bunch of Dremora in his own realm.
Yeah, for sure. I will say as well, I take back what I said about the goat. I think I did confuse it with the dog. Right. It appears to just be a pet. I mean, there are a lot of Elder Scrolls Online little items or things as well associated with Sanguine where you don't really get a full picture of, and you don't even know if they're kind of like necessarily real. Like there's a perfume as well. I think what's it called?
By the way,
Sanguine's Rose perfume. So a bottle of rare Sanguine's Rose perfume. Like it says some scarlet bottle of rare and expensive Sanguine's Rose perfume reputed to have aphrodisiacal properties. So is that a legit Daedric artifact there, or is it just someone branded their perfume as Sanguine's Rose?
Well, would the juice of a Daedric artifact itself be a Daedric artifact? I guess that's the question.
By the way, just to add, just what I was talking about when I was basically alluding to bestiality as a potential insane thing, is that there is in Daggerfall it's referred to as the Daedric Prince of perversity and unnatural sexual relations directly. And I feel like that is probably what most people think when there is an unnatural kind of thing. I'm sure there's outdated ideas about other kinds of relationships that are normalized now. But
yeah,
you know,
I was thinking the same thing.
I think an animal's a step too far, but you know, let's see where the furries go, you know. But still, what I'm saying is that there is this darker nature isn't just conjecture on our part. It is hinted to constantly throughout the lore, even though what you see Sanguine is presented as is rather tame by comparison. It's like, yeah, let's party, you know.
I mean, who knows the truth? But there is one note somewhere from Elder Scrolls Online again that talks about, you know, all these different ingredients for the party, and then one of them was this like animal, this creature, and like, oh, what's a party without one of these? I can't remember what it was. You can assume that's just haha, rowdy party, let's have a monster there, but who knows?
Yeah, I also think too, like I can imagine that sacrifice is a part of a thing, and sort of ritualistic death and getting some sick pleasure out of it. Just the whole blood thing and the whole, even the reference to the Khajiit and so on about like who can, you know, withstands the bloodlust and stuff like that. I just feel like Sanguine's constant like mention and connection with blood, that sacrifices might be a important role in those kinds of weird, perverted sort of rituals. To sort of like, you know, basically snuff, you know, like you can kind of imagine that being part of the thing. And I just think it's important to reiterate, so it's not, because I feel like you can get, it's the same thing we sort of said about Sheogorath, is Sheogorath can often get the whimsical cheese kind of treatment. But what's actually interesting is the contrast of that versus what he's potential of and the absolute insanity that they're capable of. Same with Sanguine. It's not just, haha, let's have a drink. It's like, it's not beers with the boys. It can go as far as what we
other
talked
dark
about.
things.
You know?
I found that creature. It's the Eketer.
Yeah.
You know the Eketer?
Yeah.
And as much as, like, you know, obviously sacrificing animals to us at first glance, like, oh, wow, that's crazy. But, you know, historically, you'd associate the ritual sacrifice of animals with feasts and festivals and things like that throughout, you know, like tons of cultures in history. So it very much does.
Well, even the
link
sacrifice
up.
of people and stuff wasn't some strange idea. Like, you can...
I mean, just look at the Britons, the Druids. Just
exactly. It's not some insane. You know what I mean? It's like outside of a modern context, like idea, like we live in a very certain modern society. It's very easy to conceive of how people came about these ideas and so on. Like, you know.
Well, one thing about, you know, his sphere is that it's going to make for pretty fun quests, even if they're not the most deep and thought-provoking of quests. It's a good time that most people remember. You know, like A Night to Remember, for example. It's like, I think it's in everyone's top 10 of favorite quests from the game, I think.
Yeah. It's interesting as well. I was going to say how there's this kind of speculation about Martin Septim having been in a Sanguine cult.
Well, yeah, he does say he used to worship the Daedric. I don't even know if
so he says when you give him the Sanguine Rose, because you can give him all the different Daedric artifacts for the quest because he needs one. He goes, I never thought to see this again. I once possessed it briefly, a lifetime ago. It seems now to obtain it and then give it up. I honor your dedication to our cause. And then in terms of the actual Daedra itself, he talks about when he was younger, hold on, because he has a lot of Daedra quotes. I'm just
there was an allusion to him being previously almost like a Daedric cultist at one point, because that's how he knows a lot of the Daedric sort of language and stuff, and how he can read the Mysterium Xarxes and sort of do all that kind of that jam.
It was just a phase.
Yeah, just a phase someone basically, but
well, I'm surprised I haven't found it, but I read it yesterday, and it mentions pretty sure it even mentions the Mages Guild.
Well,
hold on, here we go. Daedric magic. As a young man, I grew impatient with Mages Guild restrictions, as did many of my fellow apprentices. We threw ourselves into the riddles of Daedric magic. We hungered for forbidden secrets. Knowledge and power were our gods. You can guess the rest. We got in over our heads. People died. My friends died. I've put those days behind me, but the bitter wisdom that one has been a fool is not without value. And then, so you mix that with the fact that he's held and possessed Sanguine's Rose before. And, well, you can draw some interesting conclusions and theories from that.
Yeah, I mean, the Sanguine Rose in general, I think, is a really interesting artifact, because I mean, like, using it, say, in Skyrim, it's aesthetically really nice to look at, but then it can be a little bit underwhelming of what it actually does, of summoning a Daedra. But I think it's from Daggerfall, the description of the rose is that each time the rose is used, it wilts a little, and when all the petals fall off, it loses its power. When this happens, a new rose blooms somewhere in Oblivion and is plucked by Sanguine to be given to another champion. And I really like that description and that idea of how it works, because it kind of sums him up in general and sums up, like, everything you would get out of dealing with him and partying in his realm, is that it's amazing and beautiful at the start, but then it starts to lose its savor, and by the end of it, you're a wilted flower that's got nothing left in it, you know, until you die, and then he just picks a new one to be his, like, little bit of fun.
I also like that it is actually a rose. I like the idea of it actually being a rose and not a rose big staff more.
That's a really...
and I think based on what Martin Septim said, it seems as if in the lore it can do a lot more than just the gameplay effect of summoning a Daedra, and it's a shame. Like, he wouldn't be like, why would you to give this up willingly? Like, wow, you must believe in the cause. It's like, dude, there are just mages who can conjure these Daedra normally. So what's the advantage?
It's an interesting connection there to see it as a metaphor for it, like the kind of, you know, how like all hedonistic kind of things can potentially lead to sort of diminishing returns, because you need to keep going higher and higher and higher and higher to get the same kind of high, but you just wilt away in your mortal body, and maybe until you kill yourself in the search of pleasure, you know what I mean? Like,
And it's not much skin off Sanguine's back. I don't think he minds too much if he loses a couple of mortals in the process. He'll just, there's plenty more to pick from, plenty more who are easily susceptible to his trickery.
There is a little interesting piece from the Imperial Census of Daedra Lords, which is on the Imperial Library. It's written by Michael Kirkbride, so it's technically out of lore, but once again, we can talk about it. It says, Sanguine, Prince of Hedonism, lords over no less than 10 times 10,000 pleasure pockets of the void. As revelry and drunken stupor fall under this prince's influence, he has been a favourite of many emperors since the first foundation. Records even indicate that he resided in White Gold Tower during the reign of Riemann Cyrodiil and helped in the somewhat dubious craftsmanship of the Krendali festivals, whose vulgarities did little to help the imperial expansion into Alinor and to the other Somersets. And it's just kind of interesting. I like, because you know how like there's plenty of times when there were real life Roman emperors and so on that just complete hedonists and completely irresponsible, and they just got sucked up in the luxury of it all. That he kind of like doing that for the emperors in this and so on, and the other part to point out there is obviously the 10 times 10,000 pleasure pockets of the void, which is referring to the myriad realms of revelry, which are his Daedric realms, which are just basically these little lots and lots of mini realms, little pockets of certain kinds of pleasures or things or themes, suitable
that can be
for
changed
everyone.
at a whim, pretty much, to suit whoever's going there.
Yeah, that is actually, I think, one of the aspects of the lore is that these pocket realms are highly customizable. It's not like there's 10,000 that are static and sit there, and you pick one. It says within which Sanguine grants his guests considerable latitude for personal customization, as each mini-realm can be refashioned to meet the needs and desires of its visitants. It is Sanguine's nature to indulge the natures of others, particularly their darker desires, and then, as Drew said, so to Sanguine, absolute control is anathema. So, yeah.
Yeah. Even, it's interesting that it sort of plays on the same... it's saying, like, obviously you're saying customizable, but they it's really from the mortal's perspective of kind of what they want to see. And it was saying there's even a source where it's talking about that Sanguine himself has very little control over them, because it's kind of about what the people want, because he kind of, in the same way that he wants to see what the people do in the seeking of pleasure, same thing when he like brings them to his realms and so on, then they kind of, he wants to see what they do with it. You know what I mean? It's an interesting...
It's kind of like someone looking at an anthill, from side on and just watching what they get up to without meddling too much himself.
Yeah. It would be interesting to see if you were to put a Daedra in one of these rooms. If they would partake in kind of desires that they may have that are quite different, but to Sanguine perhaps all the same, because he's enjoying a Daedra get lost in whatever their idea of a great time is.
Yeah.
It's just an interesting concept. For example, like, let's just say you put a Zivalai in one, and it just turns into like a very violent, violent, bloody pleasure room for him in terms of just killing and slaughtering and...
Yeah.
Who knows?
I think it could quite easily like corrupt loyal followers of other princes. When you think of like, say, the Dromora and the Zivalai with their strict caste systems and their hierarchy of ranks and titles, and it would probably be quite fun to mess with that as well.
Yeah, I'll put Barbas in there and it's just a room of dog treats.
I love some little details too, and this is more so in reference to the Khajiit lore, but apparently with the trickster god Rajin, who was once a mortal, the thief god, had a drinking contest with Sanguine, and it's alleged that Sanguine was the one who gave Khajiit the secret of wine by spilling the blood of grapes. I just love I love like tiny little bits of mythological origins.
But did he do surgery on a grape? Oh, there's a meme that's aged like the fine wine that Sanguine gave Khajiits. But speaking of wine and Sanguine, actually, there is a quest in Elder Scrolls Online where you're in Blackmarsh and you go to his domain. I believe that's the pronunciation, though they like to spell it in this fancy way. And there's a party there, and I think a lot of the guests around the place or who were there have died, like the dancers, the musicians, the bartender. And so I think there's an Argonian you want to help, and to let him go, there's these secret bottles of wine that actually bring back the ghosts of the undead from Sanguine's personal stash. Like, you pour it over the thing and the ghost comes out. And I don't know, it's just a interesting little story. Is it an artifact? Would it count as an artifact? A wine that can bring out the ghosts, and it's from Sanguine's personal stash?
I guess so. It's that kind of thing where it's like, I feel like maybe we have to use the kind of artifact as in, like, ultimately comes down to a piece from not just any piece of a Daedric realm, but something just significant or of legendary importance. Because otherwise,
that
like,
makes
you know,
sense, because then
a Grummite blade becomes a Daedric artifact, or being
but
part
it can't.
of
But a Grummite blade can't do anything that a mortal weapon can't do. If you know what I'm saying, they're like the same. But I guess the difference would be, like you're saying, you could get an amulet from Sheogorath's realm that has some effect on it, but it's not necessarily a Daedric artifact as the Daedric
it's more like just a Daedric
themselves.
item or something.
Yeah, I suppose it's all subjective, but I guess you could use their classification, like if they consider it an artifact or not.
Yeah.
It gets tricky.
Yeah, it's just a subjective one ultimately. I think also we've talked before about how, like, obviously Molag Bal's the most associated with vampires, and then there's even little bits with Vaemina because she provided the cure and Morrowind,
And Clavicus Vile a little bit as well.
Yeah, exactly. He also has something. So just referring back to the Worldly Spirits book about Sanguine. So there are urges of the blood without pleasure. To fall to Sanguine is sorry, hold on. Where was it? It was somewhere I wrote. Oh yeah, he tries to tempt Khajiit into making their flesh immortal, and this is a prison to all spirits of the Debauchery. And in ways, this can be interpreted as vampirism, and there is the Hollowfang clan of Khajiit vampires who, you know, swear by Sanguine, and so on, and sort of functionally worship him, and they use blood magic and stuff like that. But perhaps you could kind of imply from that Sanguine might even somehow gift it to them, or give some sort of I don't know. Do you know what I mean? Like, just saying that they gave them immortality, and that's what keeps them trapped and stops them from dying. But I don't know how that ties in with Molag Bal necessarily. But
I don't know. Maybe in the sense that you can possess a physical artifact, he's got the vampiric strain, and he's like, I claim this now.
Yeah.
And he gives it to Khajiit, who, you know, he tempts to live forever and stray from the path. Although they are very violent. Khajiit, you do fight them in the Elder Scrolls Online. There's a variety of bosses and things. I was looking at it all last night. All kinds of area damage spells flying all over my screen and crazy HUD. But there is a whole plot about drinking the dragon Saratnax's blood to gain more power. That's kind of... it's this big blue dragon.
It's a pretty cool, like, it's a pretty metal kind of thing. Vampires, like, getting so ambitious to try to drink a dragon's blood to get more power.
Yeah.
But
I even remember hearing...
Inadvertently become dragonborn, having the blood of a dragon in you.
Yeah. But I think the blood was actually too hot to drink in one description, at least at the start.
That's
but
cool.
It's all... Yeah. But you fight them, there's all these, like, blood orb things, and there's these, like, helot sacrifices that you have to stop from. You can imagine how an MMO would style a boss battle with blood magic and orbs and stuff like that.
You can also... another culture that has just an interesting... Another blood reference too is the Aelids. Refer to Sanguine as blood made pleasure. And you can imagine...
Supposedly. Because if you read it, it just says... Such joy, it must have been that blood made pleasure watched the work and guided my movements. Like, I struggled, because I was researching this, and I struggled to find the source. I mean, it sounds like it would be his name.
It's just an Aelid manuscript, but
sorry, like a source of why blood made pleasure in that manuscript refers to Sanguine. Because
I mean, I just mean blood and pleasure are like the two other, like, noted sort of words.
Yeah.
And also, look, and also you can assume that that the Aelid's worship of Daedra and so on, and some of the crazy stuff they did, like creating all the flesh gardens and wailing wheels of Indazel, stuff like that. That kind of sick, sadistic, getting torturing kids and getting stuff like that. You could imagine Sanguine as a blood made pleasure definitely having his work in there. You can imagine him being popular in basically any really hedonistic kind of
taking the pleasure from spilling the blood of your slaves and things like that. It's like it's a good way to justify what they're doing.
It's another thing though. It's also interesting distinction to be that Sanguine isn't he's not orchestrating it. He's inspiring it, kind of encouraging the letting loose of all inhibitions and just doing what just feels good and so on. So it's kind of like it's different to a few of the other Daedric princes because it's less directed, but that has the capability to be absolutely cruel.
Yeah, I think a lot of people would kind of picture him as most similar to Sheogorath if you had to pick one Daedric prince, but they are actually quite different. Like Sheogorath is, quite literally mad. Yeah. And so he may do things and exert no control to see what happens in the same way Sanguine does, but then at other times assume full control and just, do whatever he wants because he felt like it for whatever bizarre reason he may have. Both may do dark things, but Sanguine, as you said, is definitely more of an encourager. And he feels more sane, as funny as that sounds. Like he's not...
There's a predictable process. He just wants to scale the pleasure and see where people go. It's he's got like a sort of internal interest or rules almost. Not rules in the most strict sense. I just mean that there's sort of a concrete personality. It's not wild. It's not just literally broken
even
mind.
If Sheogorath isn't necessarily in control of himself at all times, it very much feels like he's always in control of the situation and generally comes out on top. And as well as Molag Bal, if you imagine Molag Bal versus Sanguine when it comes to vampirism, Molag Bal created it out of spite for Archay and wants to spread it as much as possible, whereas I'm sure Sanguine is like, if someone comes to one of his realms and wants to be a vampire, he's like, oh, you want to be a vampire? Here, you're a vampire. Like, doesn't really care about the effects of it.
Well, that's the interesting thing is that, at least based on in-game mechanics, he seems quite accessible, as many Daedric princes can. But, it's like you were talking about Zenithar, and like you toil the fields and you work hard and you recite your little prayer to Zenithar every day and you don't hear anything back. Or you can just rock up to Sanguine's shrine with a bottle of Cyrodiilic brandy and Cyrodiil and, he'll speak to you and give you
he does a pretty convincing
pleasures.
Cosplay as well as a mortal. When you first meet Sam, you're not really going to assume that's a Daedric prince.
Isn't that an anagram of Sanguine? Didn't they just mix around the letters to make that Sam Gwevin? Or
I mean, there's too many E's, right?
Yeah, and where's the M from?
It's similar-ish sounding name, but I think there's too many mixes. But one thing I hope to see, actually, I would like to see a slightly darker representation of Sanguine, like I like to do with most. I like the polarizing aspects. It's interesting, but in like either High Rock or Elder Scrolls, it would be cool to see, or if it was Hammerfell, maybe perhaps even Hammerfell, like say you have some Crown's king and a bunch of nobles and so on, but it would be interesting if you sort of uncover some sort of like eyes wide shut kind of like secret sort of cult kind of thing under that or maybe it's all orgies or whatever. Like they obviously can't show that. They can all be implied and they can have like, all kinds of skooma and everything around. But that's obviously the darker sort of hidden thing in this little cult that the nobles partake in this big debaucherous fantasy of theirs. That's aside from, their public display, which is like, oh, we're the noble crowns and we're really pious, and they like outlaw drinking for everyone else or something like that. You know what I mean? It would just be one of those cool kind of...
you go to a pocket realm where the Emperor and the Elder Council are worshipping like an interdimensional Argonian or something.
Yeah.
Or worshipping the Hist. But yeah, there's endless possibilities with old Sanguine.
This is a bit of a... Going back to what I was saying before, apparently a phonetic anagram is a thing. So it's a phonetic anagram of Sanguine.
In that it just sounds like
you can rearrange the letters, I think, to like phonetically to make it sound like Sanguine.
It's like Tom Riddle. I think. I haven't seen that in a long time.
But yeah, I don't know. There's also the. This isn't really. I don't think it's that crazy interesting. But the threads of the web spinner are 27 pieces of enchanted, extravagant clothing and jewelry associated with Mephala. But apparently, she went to Sanguine to create them. And you can imagine that like some of them have like speechcraft buffs and stuff like that, but I don't think there's anything particularly
Yeah, like
interesting
some of them will
there.
just be like acrobatics.
The
or
only
something
extra
like
thing,
that.
it's just one extra little connection between Mephala and Sanguine, which is just interesting that to the Khajiit he is associated with like death and murder and stuff and the sort of secret, assassination, as opposed to Mephala, which takes on a little
'cause
bit of an altered
Mephala's-
role.
Yeah, because I guess Mephala and Azura and Boethiah to an extent are much less. They have much less of their darker side than say the Dark Elves perceive of them.
Yeah.
So I guess
He
I'd
also
give that to Sanguine.
he also does have a ring in the Elder Scrolls Online. Death dealers fate, fate spelled Fete, and it's kind of like a stamina ring, if you know what I'm saying. Like it says, its enchantment, escalating fate, invigorates the wielder during conflicts, increasing higher the longer they are locked in combat. That sounds like gameplay, but then it says its intended purpose is believed to be for preventing exhaustion when performing a sort of rigorous activity Sanguine's followers partake in. Now,
You don't call it combat, you're not doing it right.
Now, I don't know what kind of vigorous activity that may be, but we can all have a guess.
Yes.
So a ring that helps with that, and it there's some really weird part about it, like it tightens. These rings were enchanted to unexpectedly tighten to prevent exhaustion.
Oh my god.
So if you want to keep going, the ring will suddenly tighten, so you
Right.
don't get exhausted.
Yeah.
I'm
So
only,
wait, that's
I'm
a-
only reading the lore.
So you put that on your hand, right?
I'm a storyteller.
Yeah.
You would-
maybe
you
a
would
third
think
leg,
so.
I think.
You would think so. It's just a shock. It's on your finger so that, if you're getting tired, it tightens and you go, oh, it's like a little
Yeah.
electric shock. That's all, boys. It's just a little reminder to stay
Yeah.
strong.
Yeah, there's a struggle to keep this YouTube friendly, guys. Like it's
Yeah, you didn't help before either, but
that's all right. It's a technical term.
Now, there are also several varieties of Daedra that supposedly serve him, but they're all quite typical. None of them are like unique, really, to him. There's Ogrim, who supposedly serve as bouncers at his parties, which is a funny little thing you can imagine. Dremora, Dark Seducers, Scamps, and what's called Banekin, which, if you don't know, is kind of like this very small-looking winged kind of demon thing.
Yeah, it's kind of like an imp crossed with a scamp type thing,
Yeah. Crossed with Groot. Crossed with a
When-
Japanese demon in one of these photos where it's got a mask on.
And when I imagine the Dark Seducers, it mentions it's more like Daggerfall arena kind of Daedra Seducer, as opposed to like the Mazkin of Shivering Isles, is how I imagine he has them in his realm.
I think in Elder Scrolls Online, one of them's at his party that you talk to.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Also,
Seducer Trilvath. Because you know how they are called seducers. Yeah, Seducer Trilvath is a dark seducer leaning against the wall in Sanguine's demise, which is a party that has Old Mary spies show up to infiltrate the celebration, and you have to go and force them all to drink drink from Sanguine's goblet so that they'll be bound to the party forever.
And to be fair, I doubt ESO would ever put like the old school Dark
Yeah.
Seducers in their game. I don't think that.
if you look at,
something they
I'm personally fond of him being like a little rotund dude, like his shrine
Like in
in Oblivion. And if you look in
Mm.
Daggerfall, that shows, you can see way more. It looks way more sinister, like this sort of red, muscled, stocky, fat kind of demon holding a naked woman like this, and he's
Yeah.
standing on a skull that, in modern interpretation, you could look at it and go like, is that more like Bel's skull? Like it kind of, you know what I mean? Like the side horns, but it's probably just some kind of beast or thing.
You kind of see him as like a sleazy innkeeper who kind of leads you down a long corridor of all these rooms where other people have got they're going into their myriad realm, and he takes you to yours. That kind of vibe.
Well, speaking of Daggerfall, his quest there is to just simply kill a priest who came and stopped all these orgies that were happening.
Well, don't get in the way of a good time, you know?
There's a monk, I should say. A monk came and made everything boring, and you go kill him. And then there's the NPC dialogue you can hear after, such as all those orgies that used to go on. Have been stamped out by the monk. And then it's a lot of people are happy about the monk's death. the orgies have started up again now that they're out of the picture. So, interesting little Daggerfall quest.
Do you think people ever discover, like, someone saw that monk who was just constantly around Sanguine's parties, and every time the monk gets caught, he's like, oh, I'm here to stomp it out as he's putting his pants back on.
Yeah, sounds about right. There's also a bottle of red claw polish. If you want to be a Khajiit and paint your claws red for Sanguine's midnight. I'll tell you the worst thing I ever read, and it's in one of the Elder Scrolls Online.
That's a bold statement.
No, it was in one of the Elder Scrolls Online, kind of like ask me anything or someone answers your questions. One of those things. Pretty sure it was like out of game lore.
Mm-hmm.
And it said like, Secret Santa? There was like a Secret Sanguine. And like people give each other sexually charged gifts, I'll say, and like you have to figure out who your Secret Sanguine is.
Right, for like Saturalia celebrations or whatever.
Yeah.
Right.
But the just the phrase, I don't know, makes me cringe.
Because Secret Santa.
Who's your Secret Sanguine? I don't know.
Yeah, they could have come up with a cooler name. I think.
Yeah.
Sure.
Don't get me wrong. It's not the concept that I don't like. It's purely the name.
But yeah, so I think that's about it. In summary, he can go from like the, I'm just drinking with my buddies kind of thing and like, oh, let's have a wild night, all the way up to some sort of Warhammer 40k Slanesh level stuff where there's lots of psychotic perversions going on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you everyone for watching. Social media links are in the description, and we all look forward to nerding out with you again very soon.